Good evening and welcome to the Great Tree Story live at the Royal Geographical Society. Thank you for coming. I'm Duncan Grossart, founder and chair of Journeys with Purpose. At JWP, we are dedicated to restoring our relationship with the natural world by creating exceptional travel experiences with world-class leaders in conservation and communities welfare. It is clear that those who spend time in nature and wildernesses are inspired to protect and restore. We believe in the same. What a wonderful evening we have ahead of us. My first task is to express my great thanks to Levison and panelists, and also to our supporters, particularly Koalaa and their fantastic work with prosthetics for injured children and adults. A huge thank you to Tusk, our charity partner, for the incredible work they do protecting endangered species. You'll hear more from them shortly. Thanks also to the Royal Geographical Society, the Scientific Exploration Society, Arxon, and to all the brands who've helped spread the word and make tonight possible, and Phil, the RGS, and to Evie Model, Rob Croucher, and my own team at JWP who have made this event happen. Finally, to you, our guests, for joining us. I know that many of you have come from afar, including overseas, to join us today. Sophy Roberts is convening our panel with Levison this evening and will make the proper introductions in due course. But I wanted to make a few personal comments here. Bruce, you are best known for your series Tribe with the BBC, but it is your lesser known and I think brilliant documentary Tawai that has most informed me. It begins with you posing the question, what is our relationship with the natural world and how has this changed over time? Your work with this has been one of the significant guides in what I do now. Rosa, remarkable achievements in expedition leadership, fieldwork and science, and please know that Peru is one of our all-time favorite countries to visit. Lucy, what feats of exploration and endurance in Guyana and beyond. In both of your cases, it is fantastic and essential to see such brilliant female leadership and representation. A key aspect of our own work at JWP, both with the causes that we support in the field and in the seas, and with our guest profiles. We look forward to hearing your voices and experiences this evening. And Zach, your leadership in the creation of the vast marine protected areas for the UK's overseas territories. Zach and I attended last week's wonderful lecture here at the RGS with Enrique Sala of National Geographic's Pristine Seas Initiative, which articulated these successes so well, including the great kelp forests beneath our waves. So, to our evening ahead, a few opening remarks. Levison, your new book begins with a charming autumnal story well known to our British guests of horse chestnut trees and conkers, and of planting one of these seeds in your youth to go on and see the sapling become a tree and continue to flourish. Bruce already knows this, but this particularly touched me as I did this myself when I was young across a whole range of native tree species and continue to do so to this day. I'm sure this will resonate with many of us here too. I've so enjoyed learning from your book. It's a story of how completely interwoven and interconnected humankind is with the ancient lineage of trees. In our history, culture, art, literature, folklore, myths, legends, and our faiths. Trees and nature are in our souls. There is, of course, the not-so-good news. Our imperiled natural world is under threat from climate change and biodiversity loss. Just yesterday, it was reported that last year, the world has lost tropical forests to agriculture and fire at the fastest recorded rate ever, an area almost the size of the Republic of Ireland. Levison, you described the history of Rapa Nui, or Easter Island. This made me think further on Earth as a whole. Our pale blue dot, shown by the image taken from Voyager 1, the space probe in 1990, a tiny speck in space. We live on an island. With our current course, the outcome for Earth as a whole is there to see in Rapa Nui. The good news, there is a growing clamour to restore our relationship with the natural world. Trees are vital and, of course, best terrestrial technology to store carbon, release oxygen, safe harbour biodiversity, cool our climate, and maintain resilience in our life systems. And we do have an intrinsic relationship with the natural world. We have been genuinely distressed by the loss of the sycamore gap tree and the Toby Carvery oak. Trees embody the characteristics that all humans hold dear: strength, fortitude, resilience, patience, shelter, connection, home, love, and sentience. How do we restore and nourish this further? I believe it is incumbent upon us all to turn the knowledge and hope into direct action. As Edward Abbey, the environmental author and activist, said, "Sentiment without action is the ruin of the soul." My call for us all is to act upon what we learned this evening. Let's achieve the 30 by 30 goal, a global effort to protect and restore 30% of the Earth's land and sea by 2030. As Sir David Attenborough says, we must rewild the world. So to sum up, Levison, your book dedication is "For all my tree teachers." Now with your friends here, please teach us more this evening. Right, let's get started. Please welcome Charlie Mayhew to the stage to tell us more about Tusk.
Thank you, Duncan. Tusk is absolutely thrilled to be a beneficiary this evening. And in particular, I want to thank Levison Wood, who has been a long-standing and loyal ambassador of the charity. And I also want to recognize and thank the fantastic panel that Lev has put together for this debate this evening. Africa is one of the world's last great wildernesses, home to vast, unspoiled forests, savanna grasslands, and desert wilderness. The continent is so vast that it provides a vital sanctuary, harboring 25% of the planet's remaining biodiversity, including, of course, some of our most iconic and cherished species, too many of which are now seriously endangered. Protecting and preserving this has been Tusk's focus for 35 years, since when I'm proud that we've raised and invested over £130 million into some 250 conservation projects across Africa. Our strategy is simple. We look to identify and invest in the best grassroots conservation organizations who will deliver tangible and measurable conservation impact. Conservation is ultimately about people. And while poaching and the illegal wildlife trade remain a major concern, the biggest challenges we all face are loss of habitat due to our growing human footprint, and the equally real issue that stems from this, which is human-wildlife conflict. As such, Tusk has always recognized the need to support community-led initiatives, and we've invested tens of millions of pounds into locally led projects designed to support people who live alongside wildlife and enable them to derive greater benefits and economic security whilst also protecting their environment. Before I hand over to Sophy Roberts, our moderator, and the panel, I'd just like to finish by showing a short video, which I hope encapsulates the work that Tusk does. Thank you again for the support this evening, to our sponsors, and please don't hesitate to catch me or any of my colleagues who are here afterwards if you'd like to learn more of Tusk. But perhaps we could run the video.
Africa is in the front line of conservation. What they are protecting is one of the great treasures of the world.
must invest in the natural world around us and understand the value it has for us all, both now and in the future. It is only through a collaborative approach, under the guidance of Indigenous and local communities, that we can foster lasting and meaningful change.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to welcome to the stage Sophy Roberts, who's going to moderate the debate and will introduce our panelists.
So thank you, everyone, for coming. We haven't got a lot of time, so I'm going to crack through these introductions. Trees, forests, exploration, conservation, a huge topic and an urgent one. Trees, as Lev's new book will tell you, have inspired myths, wars, revolutions. But trees, forests, also hold the key to this planet's future. From extraordinary advances in science, we now know they literally feel trauma. If we start listening to what forests have to say and what trees are saying to each other, perhaps we can just reach for a more hopeful future. So into the woods we now go to explore some of these ideas with this spectacular group of panelists, all put together by Lev. And then we'll switch out to some audience questions after about half an hour of chat on stage. So, Bruce, Parry, a BAFTA-winning filmmaker and presenter of Tribe, recently back on the BBC with a new series. Lucy Shepherd, a British explorer, filmmaker, and Channel 4 presenter who recently completed a remarkable 50-day expedition in Guyana. Lord Zach Goldsmith, a passionate, lifelong environmental campaigner and former UK Minister for the Environment. Dr. Rosa Espinoza, a Peruvian scientist, Nat Geo explorer, and author of The Spirit of the Rainforest, a really wonderful book that's had me engrossed on my train journey up from Dorset today. And Levison Wood, explorer, author, photographer, who I'm going to turn to first. Okay. Lev, your new book, The Great Tree Story, is the inspiration for bringing together this group of people. And you're known for your walking journeys. So where did this fascination with trees come from?
Well, trees are quite static, aren't they? Well, for me, it was, I think, really the result of having spent quite a bit of time walking through forests, through different kinds of environments over the last decade. I came to realize just how important trees are, not just from an environmental perspective, but to culture. And really that's the heart of this book, is understanding the cultural significance of trees and the crucial role that they play in everything from mythology to spirituality to religion. Who's been to a pub called the Green Man? Probably most of you at some point, possibly. That idea of a connection, deep-rooted connection to nature is pretty ubiquitous. Unless you're an Inuit from Greenland, you've probably got your own great tree story, which might be a tree that you planted as a child, like I did with my conker tree, it's all in the book, or perhaps a tree that you climbed as a kid. And I think it's across the continents, and I think that's what I hope this book does, is unify people, because it's ultimately, we should get behind nature. We are all creatures of the forest, if you go back long enough, and then that deep, not just physical, but psychological and emotional connection has not left us. Despite the fact we live in cities and we may have forgotten some of those connections, but they are there in our minds deep down, and I think we need to reconnect with nature.
I mean, you start with a conker and you take us all over the world with your travels, including to the Amazon, which, Lucy, you've spent an enormous amount of time there, specifically in Guyana. And I want to ask you, because I was looking at your expedition map today, and it labels a swathe of territory unexplored. And I want to ask what that word can really mean today, and if the label is even still appropriate.
Yeah, no, I think exploration is always appropriate. It comes to surprising to a lot of people that there is still land, and I mean actual land, I don't mean like deep in the oceans, that is still unexplored, vastly unexplored. That might be for geographical reasons, it's hard to access, or for, I don't know, there might be legends that surround it, or cultures that you don't go in there. But equally, the term, explorer comes under that same bracket, doesn't it? I made a conscious decision quite a few years ago to decide to call myself an explorer, because obviously inspired by the people that walked these corridors many years ago. And, I don't think it should be confined to the history books. We live in very modern times, and you would think that having modern technology would make our world feel a lot smaller, which in a sense, of course, it does. But it also, by having these modern technologies like LiDAR and all of this stuff, it also shows us just what we don't know. It's uncovering, there's so much more to explore. It's sort of the more pages we peel back, the layers we peel back. So absolutely, it's still relevant, and the term explorers is still relevant. All of us are an explorer, really. You just have to look at a child like lifting up a rock. They are exploring for sure. And perhaps you could even argue that because with the modern technologies now and the way we're sort of thinking and just moving at such a rapid rate, I mean, what a time to be alive. Maybe we're in a new golden age of exploration. So I think it's exciting.
There's a lovely thing that Lucy's written before about how an explorer is actually just a professional delusionist, someone capable of fooling themselves into pushing further than they thought possible, which I think is a beautiful example of motivation. Rosa, you're a chemical biologist. As a scientist, you therefore work with empirical fact. But you've written this really beautiful new book about the spirit of the rainforest, about local wisdom. And I want to understand if you think those two ways of knowing are converging. Is academia catching up with indigenous knowledge, or is it the other way round?
So I was born and raised in Peru, and my grandmother is a Quechuan traditional healer, and her grandmother was an Amazonian shaman. I was raised in the Western science. I moved from Peru to the US when I was 18, and then recently to England. So, and I completed my PhD in chemical biology. So I live quite literally between the scientific, modern, analytical world, that type of framework and mindset, but also between the indigenous traditional knowledge of my own family and ancestors and the people we actively work with. And what I will say, I don't think it's about one world catching up with the other. I think it's about uniting them now, because I think to achieve true sustainability, we have got to integrate the traditional ways of knowing. In my perspective as a scientist, I see indigenous knowledge as scientific, because if you break it down, it's composed of observing and measuring and testing and reiterating. And so I think if you unite both of them, then we are actually looking at what, in my humble opinion, it's the future of exploration. And with our work, we are doing that as well in the Peruvian Amazon. And just an example of that is we recently had the first scientific paper where the first author is an Ashaninka indigenous member, showing that there is a path forward uniting these two worlds.
I mean, it seems to be happening now. I read a brilliant interview that Bruce had done years ago with The Ecologist, which Zach happened to previously edit. And it was about Tuai, actually, when you first made that film. And it was rejected by the Beeb, I think, because it was kind of too early in its thinking around indigenous knowledge and science, which is super interesting. But let's just keep you on track, because, or rather myself, you've got a pretty good line in connecting with the spirit of the rainforest, haven't you, Bruce? I mean, you were the first person to ever take ayahuasca on television. So what insights of your explorations into plant medicines given you about forests and what they can teach us?
Thanks, Sophie. Hello, everyone. Nice to be here. Thanks, buddy. Yeah, there was a giggle there, wasn't there? The Daily Mail a couple of years ago had me as an article saying Bruce Parry, widely considered to be the person who brought ayahuasca to the middle classes. didn't quite know what that meant, but anyway. Yeah, I've had the extraordinary privilege of spending time with indigenous people around the world and taking plant medicines in many corners of our planet. And each time it's been the most profound and wonderful experience on all sorts of levels. And mostly the television doesn't show you the whole thing because I wax lyrical much too much about how amazing it is. They cut most of that out. But they have been incredibly important moments in my life. And there's a lot that you will have heard about that happens when you take these types of plant medicine, and a lot of emphasis is put these days on the healing, the sort of introspection, the looking at past traumas, the revisiting traumas from the perspective of a more compassionate adult, the new reflection on self. All of that is really very valid and very true, and why most of us can go and have beautiful experiences doing it. But the other thing that is less often expressed is this other sensation that you can have in these experiences of a universal oneness, a sort of a dissolving of self, a connection to something beyond. And this is often put in the realm of spirituality, but because it's contained within indigenous culture, it will have the element of nature at its heart. This isn't the same as going on a Vipassana or other types of healing modality. This is a forest type of healing. And so the trees and your connection to nature is a part of that. You feel that you are able to have a sensation of being part of that which is beyond. And very often the trees are very central to that. So much so that later you can have this feeling, even after the experience, of like an empathy. And that, therefore, the forest, you feel the weight and the pain of the forest if it's being destroyed. And that's why so often the indigenous peoples are at the heart of the protection, because they have this feeling of connection with the forest and they feel its pain like they do their own cultures. And I think that's a huge part of what they have to share with us.
Well, there's a couple of ayahuasca chapters in your Zach, ever done ayahuasca? You have, yeah? Tell us about...
I think every politician, every CEO should be required to do it. Yeah.
Wait, so I just need to get that on the record. Every politician has done ayahuasca or should do ayahuasca.
No, I think they ought to be.
Yes, they ought
to be encouraged.
But in all seriousness, your conservation work is super impressive, inspiring, really. But I really want to know why you care. You know, what was the childhood epiphany or your political awakening with trees? Like, what is it that motivates you?
I've never met a child who isn't passionate about nature. So the start point is being born. And, you know, I was in love with David Attenborough. All I wanted for Christmas and birthdays was his videos. And then there comes a moment for all of us when you realize that this unbelievably magical thing is under threat. Like at no point in its history. It's under siege, not just threat. And it was very obvious to me very early on that I would commit myself in whatever way I possibly could to just playing a role in trying to repair our relationship with the natural world. I don't think there's anything more important. Logically, there isn't anything more important. If the Congo goes, if the Amazon goes, if the great forests of Indonesia go, it's the end of life as we know it. I mean, it doesn't matter how many wind turbines we build, how many solar panels we put on our houses. If we lose the Congo, it's game over. You imagine the Congo provides more than half of the rainfall for the continent of Africa. So it actually makes life possible, and it's being cut down at about 1 million hectares a year. And there's no, you know, all the focus in the environment, when we talk about the environment, if I'm invited by the BBC or something to go and talk about the environment, I always have to check, because 99 times out of 100, they don't want me to talk about the environment. They want me to talk about carbon. Everything's been reduced to this one-dimensional aspect, and that's where all the money goes, it's where all the bandwidth is devoted, it's all the discussions, and we forget about nature. But there's no technological substitute for the Congo or for the kelp forests that someone you mentioned earlier. We have to protect nature, we have to protect and restore. And what's frustrating about it is that, and I think also the good news, but it is frustrating, is that the solutions are really quite simple. Like everything that we need to do to turn things around is already being done by someone, somewhere. You know, if everyone had a logging code as strict as the Republic of Congo, not the DRC, sadly, logging wouldn't be a problem. You know, if every country was as good at protecting its land as Gabon or Guyana, I think you said you're in Guyana, then, you know, we'd having a very different discussion now. If every country fished like the Maldives, you know, David Attenborough wouldn't have needed to make that film. It's, you know, there are best practice in every single area exists. Somehow we've got to make that the default. We've got to make it the norm. And we know we can do it because it's already being done. It requires pressure, political will. It's why I got involved in politics. But there are many ways of doing it.
There are many ways to do it, and politics is one path. Activism is another. Lev, your medium is storytelling, films, books, photographs. You think entertainment can impact our relationship in a significant enough way, morally, behaviorally?
I think it can. I'm going to embarrass Bruce here because I have to say I watched your Tribe series 20 years ago, and that was hugely inspirational to me. And transitioning from a military career into entertainment, as you called it, which it is. I mean, it's reaching out to a mass audience. I think was for me a sort of not something I did deliberately, but when you sort of do reach out into that world, I'm sure you may have experienced this. It comes with a sense of responsibility and a duty to not only entertain, but also to tell the truth and to then use whatever platform you have to impact change, hopefully in a good way. And you know, what you, I think, have achieved, Bruce, is remarkable in the sense of bringing awareness to new ways of thinking. And that's certainly what ayahuasca did for me, was actually, I mean, the entire book, this book came from me going out to the Amazon and meeting an incredible chief of a community, the Ashaninka, Benki, and he, we spent a week or so with these guys, and you get many messages. And one for me was go and use your platform to tell the story of the trees, and that's why we're all sitting here today. The trees told me to do it. So,
well, to Zach's point, a child feels it. David Attenborough entertains us, so we think it and believe it, and we are converted. So it's a very powerful medium. And Lucy, you're also a gifted storyteller, but how do you balance your voice with people local to the places where you work, who make kind of your insights and your travels possible?
Oh, my team, everything. So, I tend to go out with a team who I form relationships early on, and they're in Secret Amazon. They're indigenous Amerindians, and they, this is our expedition. This isn't me and them. It is us, and that's very, very key for me. That, just like I said, everyone's can be an explorer. They are very much at the top end explorers. But how did it mold things? Well, of course, they sort of bring so much to the table. I'm learning from them, their way of thinking. I don't know has anyone ever been to the jungle before? Put your hands up if you've been to the jungle. I'm sure there's lots of people. Good audience. When people think of the jungle, they think of the sort of David Attenborough shows and the fruits on the trees and the wildlife and the beautiful colors, and it's your supermarket, it's your pharmacy, which it is if you know what you're doing, but also if you're by the rivers and things. But as soon as you go into the interior, into the deep jungle, where there's sometimes we weren't seeing sunlight for like 3 weeks at a time. It is dark, it's damp, everything rots, and then this whole expeditions can sort of go on its head. And there I'm thinking I'm going to be the one struggling and really trying to get through. And I'm finding a lot of my team, yes, they know the jungle and they're superb in the jungle, but when you add that to an expedition where you're moving through, everything's decaying because everything's like just it kind of feels like everything just wants to kill you sometimes in the jungle. But that's just not the case. Everything just has a really good defense mechanism because there's so much biodiversity. Everything's competing. And sort of the things that you learn when you're with the team is you shouldn't fight it. You have to go with it. But then I'm finding that they're really struggling because they're not used to moving every single day. So then I bring something to the table. And it's a very, very collaborative expedition completely. And it wasn't actually ever meant to be. I was usually, early on in my jungle expedition career, I only wanted to ever go with one local. And something happened when I was at the last point of civilization, packing my bag, excited to go. And I haven't met my first team member yet, and I hear a knock at the door. There's a knock at the door, I go to open, there's two very angry-looking Amerindian men, like, staring up at me, and I'm sort of, what's wrong? And they say, are you Lucy Shepherd? And I said, yes. And I said, well, we've heard you've come to cross the Kanuku Mountains. And I sort of say, yeah, I nod and say, yes, that's right. And they say, very, very angry, and they say, well, what gives you the right to cross these mountains that we've lived in the shadows of our entire lives? And I'm sort of taken aback. What does give me the right? And they've been wanting to do this adventure that they lived right next to, go from that point to another point. And the reason they'd never done it before, because logistically it's really, really difficult. It costs a little bit of money, and they had never been able to do it. And here I am, an outsider coming in to do it. And so I have to diffuse the situation. They'd make a very long journey from their village to come and see me, and I sort of sit them down, buy them a cold Coca-Cola, maybe it should have been ayahuasca, I'm not sure, and talk it through, and we have a good conversation. I think I'm a good judge of character, but I say, okay, well, how about you go back to your village, you pack your bags, you tell your wives, your families that this adventure that you've been dreaming of your entire lives, that you're going to come with me, and it has to come tomorrow. And they sort of nod and say, yes, no, that sounds good, Lucy, and on one condition for you. And I go, yeah, anything. And they say, can our mates come as well? And so suddenly, this two-person team turns into 6. But oh my gosh, it was that proved to me just the value of having, the more locals, the better. Everyone has their role to play. We're all in it together, and it's staying that way from now on.
There's a scene in Rosa's book in a place called the Boiling River, and my God, are they in it together there. It's really interesting, a chapter. But Rosa, I'm so interested by the way you write and notice, because you go in so tight on detail, telling, puzzling detail. It made me think of the wonderful book by E.O. Wilson, Letters to a Young Scientist, where he talks about how a litmus test for exploration is to look for the oddities. And he uses this beautiful phrase, make use of puzzlement. And I want to know what your puzzlement was in the forest. What was the thing that just kind of grabbed you by the gut and produced this body of work?
There have been many puzzlement moments, I would say. There was one in particular that happened a few years ago that within the span of a month, I went from Yellowstone in the United States to Alaska, back to the deep Amazon, particularly high altitude Amazon that a lot of people don't think of when they talk about the Amazon rainforest, completely different ecosystem. And I got to connect and learn from a lot of the local communities and traditional wisdom at each of these places. And when we were hiking in the Peruvian high altitude Amazon, the last thing I'm thinking of are bears. That is not something you grew up thinking when you spend a lot of time in the jungle to think about bears, not in the Peruvian Amazon. And here I am, high altitude, my lungs were really, it was really difficult trekking. Of course, our local team were absolutely, fantastic. And it was a few hours in, and the local indigenous leader turns around and tells me, Rosa, right where you are standing, a week ago, I saw an Andean bear and her 2 cubs. I just came from Yellowstone. The first thing you learn when you are exploring or leading a team in Yellowstone is bear spray, be ready, know how to use it, be prepared. So that is the first thing that I think of. So I'm like, we are so far away from anything, like any doctor or even being able to get out of this if something was to happen. And he just told me, oh yeah, they come from the Andes to look for food here very often, and we just, cross each other and say hi, and each goes on their own way.
So they shouldn't be in the forest?
Well, it's not really typical in the rest of the Amazon rainforest, but in those specific high altitude forests, they do. The life doesn't really know boundaries. And so the biodiversity just kind of adapts. And he explained more about their views regarding bears and how they are a sign of wisdom and strength, and they gather so many lessons from them. And it just resonated in that moment, just clicked in my head that the Shoshone people that I was learning from that used to live live in the Yellowstone area, as well as the different communities in the Alaska region where I was too, they all see bears through the same lens. And it was one of those moments where the dots from very different ecosystems, very different cultures that perhaps wouldn't be talking to each other now, see nature through a similar lens, this indigenous cosmovision that, as many of the panelists have mentioned today, it's the uniqueness of our interconnectedness with nature. And I think that really just clicked that we are all connected, and so we have to find for a solution together. And I think now in the digital age where loneliness and depression are on the rise more than ever, when we look back to nature, I think we all really reconnect with our wild.
That interconnectedness is, I think, at the heart of your most personal piece of work, Bruce Tawai. You were seeking to answer questions that were deep inside you from having done your Tribe series. And you subtitle that documentary A Voice from the Forest. Maybe you could just share with us what voice you actually wanted us to hear.
Yeah, thanks. So I made this film, which really looks at, it's a film about our connection with the natural world and why that may have shifted over time. And in it, I visit a group of people who once upon a time were nomadic foragers and hunters in the forest, the Panan and the Borneo. And it was very clear to me when I was with them that they had a way of perceiving that was so present. If you're not in your body and your senses in every moment when you're hunting, you're not going to get the monkey. If you're not in your body and your senses when you're foraging, you're going to miss where the food is, or you'll pick something poisonous. So you have to have a certain type of attention about you when you're a hunter-gatherer. And then in the making of this film, I went back to visit them many years later, and they've now settled and they're beginning to grow food. And the difference between that type of attention from the hunter-gatherer to the farmer was very real. You could just chop and chat and just be abstract. And that just got me thinking that maybe this is something that's happened to all of us over time, is that once upon a time as a species, for 95% of our time as an animal species, we were having a different type of attention, and we were in our body, in our senses in a certain way. And the last 10,000 years, since agriculture, you can be very in your body and senses if you go on Vipassanas all the time and you learn to meditate, and you can be a very present horticulturalist, but you don't have to be. And it's quite possible that in this period of time that we've become much more abstract, much more in our minds and in our heads, and we've lost a sense of perception. And so this is what the film is all about. And also in it, I go and visit another group of people who are so present, they're in the Amazon, called the Piraha. They're so present that they don't even have a future or past tense to their language. They just literally, they couldn't even abstract out the present moment if they tried, because they don't have words to take them there. So they are living so present. And I remember reading this book by a guy called Daniel Everett, who used to be a missionary, and he was turned out of being a missionary by this group. And they're a fascinating group for all sorts of reasons, their language in particular being one of them. But in the book, I remember reading that they had a lived connection with the forest where the forest spoke to them. And I'm like, wow, I want to go and meet these people who are so present that they have this feeling that I can only touch upon when I'm doing plant medicines, or when I'm drumming, or when I'm dancing, or when I'm meditating. But they have it on a daily basis, just walking into the forest. So I went to go and meet them to ask that specific question: how do you hear the voice from the forest? And they tell me it comes into our hearts. And then it becomes words. And then I'm like, well, what's it telling you? And in particular, there was this one entity they called Kaubage, and the guy I was with was like, without Kaubage, I am nothing. He directs my every moment. And I'm like, what sort of things does he tell you? It's like, don't fuck with the trees. To only take the bits you need. Only utilize those that are necessary. And then later on with that same group, tragically, if you see the film, in more recent years, they have been shown how to take the trees down and create gardens by the missionaries that were there amongst them. And so these very same people are telling me that the trees are telling them. I mean, what it must be like for them to utter these words. It's like the trees are telling them, please don't chop us down. We're like you. We feel too. Please don't burn us. You are now at war with us. And this is what these people are telling me that they're feeling in their bodies, that these trees are telling them, and they're still doing it. And that, for me, was the most poignant moment in the whole of my journey making that film. Is like, maybe this is a wound that every one of us is carrying so deep inside of us that it is part of who we are and the tragedy and the trauma of what we've become. And that was part of what the voice from the forest was.
Yeah, it's a beautiful film. If you haven't seen it, I urge you to. It tells the story from a very powerful human place. But Zach, you are joining dots on a pretty big scale. When you were an MP, obviously you had to look after your local constituents, but you have been working as far away as you can possibly be from where we're sitting now in Papua, Indonesia. I would love it if you could try and explain to this audience why we should even care about that place and what it is and what you're doing there.
So if I've got to start by saying I've never been there, I was banned. I wasn't allowed to go.
Yeah, you're banned.
I went all the way to Jakarta and they wouldn't let me go any further. But it's the second biggest island in the world. It is perhaps the most important forest. It is raw, and it's modern science will find the odd new lizard or frog or something in the rest of the world's forests, and there's a lot of excitement about that. In Papua, they found new types of tree kangaroos, big mammals. They'll find a new genus of echidna, the egg-laying teatless mammals. I think it's the only mammal that lays eggs, other than the platypus, which is also there. So it's just raw and extraordinary, and it's a serious threat. There are thousands of bulldozers have been shipped across by Jakarta. They're all there on the edge of Papua, and the plan is to just devastate millions upon millions of hectares and replace it with sugarcane as part of these old-fashioned food estates that they tried years ago in Indonesia. It didn't work. There are about 20 million hectares of degraded land as a result of the last experiment. So it matters. It really matters. And there are big bunch of people.
You've created a national park. I mean, you've worked with the government to make a national park there.
Yeah, and I was so happy about this. This was called Mamburano. It was 1.7 million hectares. You can see on the map it's a huge area. And I really felt that we were doing amazing things in Papua. The government there, it was the last thing they did before they handed the reins over to the next government. But the gain of that national park is dwarfed by the threat that Papua is now facing. So we're having to cobble together an alliance and a coalition of people. We have to try and persuade the government, we think we can, that there's enough international support, financial support, political support, and that there is a different path for Papua, one which will bring more prosperity without the effect of destroying one of the most important places on the planet. So that's my current obsession. I don't know if it's going to work. We'll probably know in about 2 months' time, but it is hugely important.
Well, to even be attempting to gazette national parks at this moment in time, as I'm sure Tusk would speak to as well, is an absolutely heroic achievement, I think. I would think we should open up to the floor, actually, and some questions. We've decided not to use a roving mic in the hope that you would shout loudly and clearly and direct your question to one of the panelists. I'll try and repeat it. Any hands? Yes, lady on the front row. Essentially, you're asking how we've got human greed on one side and a desire to change the game for those that can hear the trees, yeah?
I think that for us, we need to fall back in love with nature, with the forest, and that comes from learning how to feel again. It comes from learning how to heal. For any of us who have been on a journey where you've gone on the inner journey to try and let go of some of our wounds so that we can feel more deeply, that's a journey in its own right, and it's difficult, but it does bring about this sense of empathy that you have at the other end. And with that empathy, you can come about with a different way of behaving and encountering and relating to the world. And so that hopefully will be at the heart of how we change behavior. And at the heart of that is our consumption. You know, the reason that the forests are going is not because of the people who are living there very often, it's because of the way that we are consuming. And so when you talk about survival, I don't think that we are in a place of having to deal with survival. We're in a place of excess. The people who are living in the forests, well, I wouldn't call it, depends. The indigenous peoples aren't in a place of survival either. They're also in a place of abundance, but they're at least living locally, and they're able to witness their own impact on the forest because everything they do, they can see the impact on a daily basis. So I think the problem is really us. And I'm not sure if I'm answering your question at all. I do apologize, but I think that we are the ones who have to heal. We are the ones who have to re-establish our relationship and to feel more deeply. And I think that things like the plant medicines that I've had the great privilege of trying, I think many other spiritual practices, with the narrative of us being part of nature. We live in a scientific realm where we see ourselves as above it and separate from it. And I think all of these narratives are definitely part of the problem. So I think that...
And part of your next book as well, which we hopefully somebody else will ask a question about, egalitarianism. The gentleman on the left-hand side, please.
It's like an exclusive. I think I get permission to say this. Yeah, no, I'll be going out to do a big expedition in Africa, secret Africa into the wild, and it's going to be out on Channel 4. So yeah, looking forward to doing that. It's going to be a big expedition to really sort of showcase everything we've been talking about to this evening. How can we connect back with nature? Yeah, I really like to...
Are we allowed to know which country?
I don't know. I can't quite see. But yeah, somewhere in East Africa. But yeah, no, I really hope that just like what you said, Bruce, and Bruce and Lev, we can all sort of contribute in some way in trying to get us all more connected with nature. And hopefully, for me, again, just like Lev, it was early on watching Bruce's programs. Storytelling matters. It really does matter. And hopefully with Secret Africa, that's if I can inspire one person to care a little bit more about the planet, then that's good enough for me. But hopefully more for the ratings.
The lady here on the right-hand side. So to repeat the question for everybody, what are we doing in this country to educate the next generation to make them care about nature and to effectively grow this empathy of which you've all spoken?
I mean, the truth is not nearly enough, because we're still very separated and insulated from nature. I mean, if you ask the average child to list corporate logos or shoe types and things, they'll rattle them off. You ask them to name English trees, they might get oak, possibly, holly, possibly, but it won't go much further than that. So we need a huge campaign of kind of ecological literacy. And I think the best way to do that is by exposing people to nature. I mean, I read something from a psychiatrist a couple of days ago, which just struck me as being so obvious, but it was beautiful how she described it. That birds sing when they're relaxed, when there's no predator. So if there's a predator around, the birds tend not to sing. So we love birdsong. When we listen to birdsong, it's good for our mental health. We relax because that sort of primordial, ancient connection with nature kind of resuscitates. It's there in all of us. We know intuitively that if the birds are singing, everything's okay, and we're happy. And there's so much evidence that exposure to nature helps people recover quicker from physical injuries. Obviously, mental health, the link is well established. We just need to expose people to the natural world. And there are lots of countries. Costa Rica is a deeply ecological country. I mean, there's a huge scandal at the moment in Costa Rica. I heard about this illegal deforestation, and everyone's up in arms. It's been going for 3 months now. And the reason it's a scandal is because the guy who's done it is a friend and a former backer of the current president of Costa Rica. So I looked at this, Costa Rica, they can't possibly, they can't join the others and start trying. It was 8 acres. I mean, I love all trees, and 8 acres is 8 acres too many. But this was a national scandal. We wouldn't have a scandal like that if 8 acres were destroyed in this country. Look how many we're destroying for You know, look, a high-speed rail is doing that every time we blink. I mean, it is possible. That is a country that passionately cares. And there are lots of reasons for that, but I think we start by looking at what they've got right and emulating as much as possible.
In Japan, there's a concept called shinrin-yoku, which translates as forest bathing. And if you go to the doctor with depression, the first thing they do is give you a doctor's note to say, go for a walk in the woods. It's prescribed on their health service. And I think it's so important because just being around this ancient ecosystem, you know, we evolved in the forest. We were, for most of our evolutionary history, taking in the sounds, the sights, the smells, the pheromones, the vibrations of the trees, and then to be suddenly deprived of that in the last 10,000 years is a bit of a jolt to the system. And I think we need to reconnect with trees just by being amongst them.
We need more forest schools.
If I could just add something as well, I think play should also be at the heart of any program, initiative, or activity to do with connecting kids with nature. I work with schools globally, and there is enough scientific research and data now to prove that when you do something through play, your memory and your learning abilities increase 400x. So the ability to actually improve even just learning and education through play and through connecting with nature and everything that everyone's connected, that reconnecting to the wild, I think it's absolutely key.
And when it comes to young people in the UK, we're starting from such a low, we can really improve. The average UK child, this is something I read recently, spends much less time than the UK prisoner outside each day. So we can really improve that.
There are some projects that are being tried. A friend of mine, George Lamb, started a project called Grow in East London not so long ago, where he managed to persuade a headmaster to change the curriculum in the small areas that he could to bring in meditation, to bring in growing food, to bring in other aspects of horticulture and various things that they were trying to make that shift to try and even get it into the main curriculum, but it's very embryonic. You can get social prescribing in that sort of forest bathing type of prescription in the UK too, but it's very limited and not really spoken about enough.
Thank you. Here in the centre. Okay, so favorite tree, everybody, and one action to change the game for the rainforests. Zach, you're on.
It's a very tough one, because we need big systemic change. It's not, we were talking earlier, and the financial incentive to destroy the Amazon is about 40 times greater than the incentive to protect the Amazon. So we've got to switch the market. The market, the most powerful force for change other than nature itself. But for as long as it's blind to the value of valuable things like forests and ecosystems, and for as long as it doesn't attach a cost to bad things like pollution and waste, that force is going to be taking us over a cliff. So that is the challenge. That's fundamentally what we have to do as a species and figure out how to do that. Which means my one thing would be get political. You don't have to stand for office. You don't have to be an MP or a councillor or whatever it is. But we can all be political. If you sign a petition, that's politics. And I think we need to just put as much pressure as we possibly can, using every tool we have at our disposal, to let the decision makers know that we expect action from them. That's what I would do.
Favorite tree?
Oh, favorite tree. I mean, I'm tempted to say oak, but I'm going to say, because I've just planted a beautiful crab apple. It's just such a generous, beautiful tree. I adore them.
Oak. Before the next person does. I mean, there's so many things that I've seen over my travels that I would love to just say, like, stop the palm oil, stop the gold, stop this, like, there's a million. There's no way I could encapsulate any one of them, but be a more conscious consumer for sure. But really, I guess the theme that's coming out of me this evening is to fall in love with nature. And I think that the other thing that maybe is coming out, sorry to be predictable, is try and explore the idea of
ayahuasca.
Doing something that will allow you to feel more deeply into nature.
I'm going to go for the Mediterranean pine. I just love the smell. Reminds me of kids' holidays. Speaking of kids, I think it's so important to get your children interested in nature from a young age. It's what got me. It's why I'm sitting here, that my dad made me plant that conker when I was 10. There's somebody in the room tonight, and I will not name and shame, but he told me a very good story. When I was researching and writing about this book, I bumped into an old paramate of mine, and I was expecting a thorough ribbing when I said I was going to write a book about trees. But instead, he was like, oh, I like trees too. And I was like, oh, right, in what way? He said, I'm a guerrilla planter, a guerrilla tree planter. I said, what does that mean? And then he subsequently told me he goes and sneaks around at the dead of night with his children, presumably in a balaclava, illegally planting trees in places like Windsor Park. To make matters better, he takes the sort of that official-looking mind tape and puts it around so the council think they've done it themselves. I'm not advocating that, but it's good for the kids to get them engaged and activists early.
So guerrilla planting, very good. Lucy, how about you?
I was going to say oak, but Bruce, you got that. I'll go willow in terms of trees. And I mean, that's the thing. I think it's not black and white. You're sort of asked what's one thing that we can do. And I don't think we have to, personally, I don't think we need, or we're going to need to change like drastically the way we live our lives. Like the technology is there, we have the tools, we can, we just, again, we need to put pressure on politics in order to take us there. But in terms of one thing that you can do individually, apart from being, mindful and about moderation and things like that, something that we could all do tonight is check where your pensions are going. Are they being invested in, are they being invested in renewables, non-renewables? Have a look and dig into that, because there are some better options than other ones. And so that's one actionable thing that we could all do and make a huge difference if every single one of us did that tonight.
Thank you.
Favorite tree, I would say the ceiba tree. So it's an ancient, old, big tree in the Amazon, and particularly because a lot of indigenous communities believe that when their elderly die, they go to reside in the tree, because then they can go really tall up to the treetop and be close to the sky. An actionable thing, I would say, to protect your pollinators, particularly wild bees. And that applies, I think, anywhere in the world. And something very simple that you can do, besides the obvious of supporting and sharing, it's placing a bowl of water with little rocks so they have a place where to land, because the accessibility to water, it's key, and it is endangering pollinators as well. And I think supporting any kind of science that does serve for the positive to politics. In our case, we use science to create a new law to protect wild bees in the Amazon that just got approved quite recently. But I think anybody can take that kind of action that I shared.
Thank you for mentioning that, Rosa, because there is the most... Rosa has done some extraordinary work with the stingless bee, and I urge you all to go and Google her name in the New York Times after this is over, because it is a ravishingly interesting story. Another question. Thank you very much. So mass tree planting, contentious. You.
It's all in the book. Just read the book. There's lots of good projects, there's lots of bad projects. The reason I chose Tusk really to be the partner for this is some of the incredible work that Tusk does locally in Africa, particularly in terms of community engagement, because that is at the heart of any project, whether it's tree planting or not. I think it's so important to involve the local communities and incorporate the educational side into any environmentalist policy. So I won't go into any details about specific tree planting itself, because there's lots of layers and complications around that. But I'd just say that planting a tree is better than not planting a tree generally.
Go gorilla.
But yeah, go gorilla. But yeah, there's some incredible work being done by Tusk's local partners in Africa. So I urge you to check them out on the website.
Brilliant. Well, I am going to pull this to a close with the majorly important news that there is a book for sale, 2 books for sale outside here. I think everybody gets a copy of yours if they've got a ticket.
Got one.
Yeah. So, but you can
please leave a review on Amazon.
Yeah, leave a review on Amazon, and look out for Rosa's, which is in the Stanford's Books Fair, is just by the cloakroom. But a massive thanks to the panelists. for your wit, candor, and expertise. And thank you again to our host this evening.
Thank you all. I would like to introduce my good friend, Ryan White Wolf. So Ryan and I actually met in the Amazon at that fateful tree meditation. So Ryan is the founder of Voice of the Earth Foundation, a global charity uniting 13 indigenous tribes and 13 orchestras from across the world in a groundbreaking initiative, creating a film and a symphony for nature. Through his visionary collaboration, he seeks to honor cultural heritage, promote environmental healing, support indigenous-led projects through recurring revenue from music and film distribution, and inspire a collective reconnection with the earth. Ryan, we've got 10 minutes with you. Over to you.
Thank you, buddy. Thank you. That was pretty much the first panel that I watched that I very, very, very much enjoyed, so thank you so much. Some indigenous teachers, they believe like to listen to the voice of the earth, sometimes we have to give to that as well. And like nature is always singing for us. And when we learn to sing to nature, then there's like this reciprocity and we come back into that cycle and it like opens the heart for that door of the voice of nature to sing back to us and for us to listen to her. Tonantintlali means Mother Earth. Tlasukamati means from my mouth I give you love. Thank you, thank you.
Wow, wow, wow. Thank you, mate. That was really, really powerful. Yeah, you can check out Ryan's music online. He's incredible.